could do that. Being with family at those times is really important. Okay, folks, we are going to jump into our scripture passage today, and I will offer, as we always do, that if somebody is here without the harmony of the Gospels, please raise your hand so that we can make sure that you get one. Is there anybody who needs a harmony of the Gospel? Abner has some there. This is an edited version of the New International Version of the Bible that just puts the Gospels side by side. So you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John side by side. And in this particular story, it is useful because we have Luke and Matthew and Mark all giving this story. And so we have those accounts all there. Okay, everybody got a harmony who would like one? Now, if for some reason you want to just follow along in your Bible, the major portion is going to come from Luke chapter 5, but then we have Matthew 4 and Mark 1 that give accounts of this as well. But the most detail is given in Luke 5, so we'll be spending more time there. So I've got a question for you. Would love to hear from any of you speaking up either online or in the classroom. What first prompted you to follow Jesus? What first prompted you to follow Jesus?
Daddy.
I'm sorry, say that again.
My dad.
Your dad. I love it when I hear an answer like that, that one of our parents has been the primary prompting to follow Jesus. Somebody else. What first prompted you to follow Jesus? Yes, I think, John?
Well, somewhat like him, it was actually my mother, because my dad was not an Adventist.
Uh-huh.
Still to this day, I am 72 years old, and I can still see sitting on the couch with my mother and reading Bible stories to me and pointing the pictures out to me.
Wow, wow. Great memories. Anybody else? What or who prompted you to follow Jesus?
It had to be my mother, because my father wasn't an Adventist either, and she had kids that she got to church every week, and she'd have a worship, and every morning while we were getting dressed for school, she'd have a worship with us.
Wow, wow.
She lived through hell being an Adventist. My father.
Yeah. Wow. Anybody else? Oh, Roy, please.
I was going to say, for me, it was Philippians 3, 8 through 12.
And how did you come on to Philippians 3?
Well, I was studying the books of the New Testament, and when I read what Paul said there, it just touched my heart.
Wow.
Our family's been Adventist for 5 generations, so that wasn't the issue. But being an Adventist to me wasn't being a child of God necessarily.
Exactly. Very true. Very true. That it's not the church that connects us to Christ. It can help, but it is something that we experience as we choose to connect to Jesus. Anybody else? Anybody else? Maybe somebody online? We've got yes, Marge.
Oh, there's a lady up there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed your hand. Please.
It's my mother. She would get us kids ready for church, and my dad had quit going to church, so we were little kids. She'd drive us by the gas station where he was working and make sure we waved at him at work when they saw him. And it just touched his heart, and he just gave his heart to Jesus and started going to church with us.
Wow. Well, we all have very different stories. Sometimes there's similarities. There's a lot of people today who have talked about family and parents, and that's a beautiful thing when that happens. It doesn't always happen that way. The story we're looking at today is a story about somebody choosing to follow Jesus. And if we read it only from the account of Matthew and Mark, it has a little bit different feel to it. So we're going to look there first, and then we're going to go to Luke and say, and then we're going to compare it to John. So all of the accounts of this story are from the synoptics, but as we put it together with John and remember what we have learned so far about the unfolding of this story from all four Gospels, we say, oh, there's more here than we realized. And what I'm hoping that we'll see is that in this story of Peter choosing to walk away from his family business and to go on the road with Jesus full time, that what we're going to see from this story is something about the way that God works with us. Now, it's not likely, it could happen, but it's not likely that God is asking you to walk away from your family business or your regular work and say, I want you to do something, to go on the road full time with some sort of a gospel outreach. I mean, there are people who do that sort of thing, but that is specifically what he was asking Peter to do. And in Peter's making the decision to do that, it was another step in his maturing experience in trusting Jesus. And so rather than focus on the specific of, oh, is Jesus asking me to leave my family business? Is Jesus asking me to leave the work that I normally do? Rather than focusing on that, what I want us to focus on, what is the next step that Jesus is asking of you? Because typically there is some next step, that we have something ahead of us that is another step of maturity. And it's that another step, that next step of maturity that I'd like for us to focus on today. The stories of the Gospels, the stories of Jesus interacting with people, tell us about advancing, maturing steps. And sometimes we get stuck and say, well, I don't want to make that step. And it may not be that step that God is asking you to do. A typical one here is the rich young ruler. We have studied that story in the past. We'll be studying it coming up here in a few months. And when we study that story, and Jesus says to the rich young ruler, go sell everything you have and give that money to the poor and then come and follow me, we will generalize that and we say, okay, if you're going to follow Jesus, that's exactly what everybody has to do. They have to sell everything they have and give that money to the poor. Well, that's not even consistent with what Jesus asked other people to do. For example, take Nicodemus. That's not what Jesus said to Nicodemus, and Nicodemus was a very wealthy man. And so it doesn't even hold true if you look at how Jesus treated other people, let alone speaking to all the people living today. And so sometimes we jump to conclusions that are really illogical, and we cause ourselves difficulty and confusion that we don't need to cause. Now, having said that, that doesn't necessarily make it any easier, because the tough things that are our next step are possibly going to be just as hard to swallow and just as big a whoa sort of a reaction to us as what Jesus asked of Nicodemus or the rich young ruler or Peter. But let's be careful to not get stuck on the specific that he asked of them, because that's what they needed to do in their circumstance, in their life. That was what they needed to do, but it was the next step. And all these stories tell us principles about what the next steps might be for us in our maturing process with Jesus. And I've made a little speech here before we jump into the lesson, but I just want to give you an opportunity to respond what I've said or ask any questions before we jump into the story, if you do want to respond or make any comments about that. Okay, I'll take that as either clear as mud or please, let's get on with it. Yeah, Ken.
Repeat the question. I was drifting.
Okay, I just asked, does anybody want to make any comments or ask any questions about this idea of next steps might not always be the same for everybody?
Yeah, I mean, next steps are totally different for everyone. I mean,
Yep.
It might just be, one could be getting your kids in church, or it could be, I'm going to give 2% of my money.
Yeah.
Or it could be 1%, I'll try a little bit. It's nothing for everybody.
Exactly. No, that's exactly the point, Ken. And so as we look at this story of Peter, we're going to see what the next step was for him. And let's jump into it and let's see what this story tells us about Jesus, about Peter, about us, about the way that God works with us. And if you're in your harmony, you would be on page 43. And you'll see here on page 43 that there is story number 42. Just a coincidence that the page number and the story number are so close together. That doesn't always happen. So here's story number 42, and it says, a remarkable catch of fish. And you'll see that it starts off with Luke 5, but turn the page, and there you will see the Matthew and the Mark account. So turn the page, and we're actually going to read the Matthew and the Mark account first. So turn the page, and you'll see the Matthew 4, verses 18 through 22. Now, if you were only reading the book of Matthew and not looking at this in the harmony, what you would find is that this story follows very closely on the heels of Jesus' temptation in the wilderness. And so we have Jesus' temptation in the wilderness, and then we come to this story, and we'll go ahead and read it. Matthew 4, 18 through 22. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. That's the way Matthew tells the story. Let's look at how Mark tells the story, Mark chapter 1. Mark also tells this story, as you can tell in chapter 1, very, very early, and he tells this story again almost on the heels of Jesus' temptation in the wilderness. So here in Mark chapter 1, verses 16 through 20. As Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. At once they left their nets and followed him. When he had gone a little farther, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John in a boat preparing their nets. Without delay, he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat and the hired men and followed him. Now, when we read the synoptics, that's Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we come across this story relatively early, and especially in Matthew and Mark. And so we could come to the conclusion that, well, let me ask you, if you were just reading through the book of Matthew, and you read the story of Jesus' baptism, and then the temptation in the wilderness, and then this story, and if you're reading in Mark, and you read the story of Jesus' baptism, his temptation in the wilderness, and then you read this story, what conclusions might you come to? Let me hear from some of you.
Doug,
Yes.
when you went through this timeline using John a few weeks ago,
Yeah.
it just finally occurred to me that the disciples didn't follow Jesus for 3.5 years.
Exactly.
They followed Jesus for maybe 2 years.
Yeah.
And that was eye-opening to me, that he had a whole year and a half of ministry all on his own, essentially, with various people around him.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, you're getting right at the heart of it. And we're going to explore that just a little bit further. So let me expand that comment. And that is, if all we had were the synoptics, we would miss the entire first year of Jesus' ministry, which we call the Judean ministry. Now, I started to prepare. Let me see if it makes any sense. Well, let me share my screen with you here, because I started to prepare a slide for you, and I only got partway through. So let me just share with you what I have. Okay, see if I can do this quickly. And if not, I'll skip it. Abner, when I share my screen here, for some reason it's not showing my, let me try again.
Pick anything. Pick anything and then navigate to it once you started sharing.
Okay, so let me do this. If I pick, oh, here it is. Okay, here we go. And if I share here, are you seeing it now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so you can see that I didn't get all the way through this, and I apologize for that. Let me just, can you see my mouse moving around?
Yes.
Okay, so I didn't finish the chart, but this is what I drew on the board when I was with you several weeks ago. That here we have, these are the 4 Passovers. Well, that's not right. I have too many lines here. Anyway, you can tell I didn't get done. But we have this first Passover that begins the Judean ministry. We have this next Passover. This is in John 2. And then we have this Passover in John 5 that begins the Galilean ministry. And we have this Passover in John 6 that begins the year that we haven't talked about, where Jesus leaves Galilee and goes north. And then we have this Passover that's Jesus' crucifixion. And so you can tell I was not done with making my chart here, but this is what I drew on the board for you. And then we have Jesus' baptism back here. So Jesus is baptized here, and he has the temptation in the wilderness here. And then we have the cleansing of the temple here in John 2 with the first Passover and the beginning of this whole year of Judean ministry before we get here to John 5. And John is the one who gives us these successive Passovers that allow us to date the ministry of Jesus and allow us to see how long it was. And where we've come through now is this whole Judean ministry already. And now we're into the Galilean ministry. And part of the way that we can date this is not only the Passovers, but when John is put into prison. And John is put into prison about here, and then John is executed about here. And so we have these markers that help us to see how much time has gone by. And right now we're in the Galilean ministry, and we're about here. And Jesus met Peter about here over a year ago, probably as much as about almost a year and a half. Now let me stop sharing. Did I stop sharing?
Sure.
Okay, so we're back to regular view. Now, I'm sorry for my very incomplete chart, but maybe that helps you a little bit. And you remember that if you were there several weeks ago, we drew this on the board and so forth. So if we were just reading the synoptics, we would not see that whole Judean ministry. For whatever reason, Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't tell anything about that Judean ministry, which is a whole year long. Well, in fair play, John almost says nothing about the Galilean ministry. Matthew, Mark, and Luke had covered that pretty well. And so by the time that he writes his gospel quite a bit later than theirs, probably several decades after theirs, he gives about 2 sentences, and we'll read those later when we get to that part in John 6. He gives about 2 sentences to the Galilean ministry. So the Judean ministry is only covered by John, and the Galilean ministry is only covered by the synoptics. Now, you say, who cares? Well, in this particular lesson, it's really important to realize that the way that Matthew and Mark tell the story make it sound like this was Jesus' very first time to meet with Peter. But we know that's not the case. We know that Jesus had met Peter over a year ago. And I just want to remind you of that. Hold your finger here and turn back to that story. Look back to the story and you'll find it on page, let's see here. You'll find it on page 34. Page 34. And it's story number 28. And we know that this happened right after Jesus' baptism. So we can fit this in to the sequence, even in the synoptics, even though the story is not told in the synoptics, because we know that this happened within weeks of Jesus' baptism. And so here we have the story in John 1, starting with verse 35. The next day, John was there again with two of his disciples. When he saw Jesus passing by, he said, "Look, the Lamb of God." When the two disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them following and asked, "What do you want?" They said, "Rabbi," which means teacher, "where are you staying?" "Come," he replied, "and you will see." So they went and saw where he was staying and spent that day with him. It was about the 10th hour. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, "We found the Messiah," that is the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas," which when translated is Peter. The next day, and then it goes on telling about the others. This is the calling of the first 5 disciples. And so here it is, soon after Jesus' baptism, within weeks of his baptism, Jesus is gathering his first 5 disciples, which include Peter, but he does not ask them to go on the road full time with him. Instead, they're kind of in and out, back and forth. And again, remember the geography. All of this is happening down in the desert out from Jerusalem, which is about 75 miles south of Galilee. And again, I drew the map on the board and we drew the timeline. And when we put that together, we say, oh, Peter and Andrew, brothers who ran a small fishing business, were down in the desert around John the Baptist. Andrew was one of John the Baptist's disciples, had been following him. And when John the Baptist says, "I'm not the main event, Jesus is, follow him," Andrew does. And the first thing he does is goes and gets his brother Simon, who becomes Peter. And he says, "I want you to follow him too." Now, this all happened before that first Passover of the cleansing of the temple. And I want you to just follow the sequence here. You're already on page 34, story number 28. Look at what the next story is. The next story, story number 29, is just a couple of days later. And this is the first miracle. This is the turning of water to wine in Cana, which is way up north, about 75 miles north, up in Galilee. So they had traveled with Jesus from the south. They'd gone up north. They'd gone to this wedding. And notice how it ends. Look at the end of the story in John chapter 2 and verse 11. This, the first of his miraculous signs, Jesus performed in Cana in Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. Now, whenever we hear the word disciples, we think 12. But at this point, how many were there? I just told you a moment ago. There were 5. There were 5. Peter and Andrew and Philip and Nathaniel and John. But they were not on the road with him full time at this point. They're in and out, they're back and forth, but they are with him here up in Cana, near their own home. And they're going to go back and forth fishing and going back to their business and in and out with Jesus for the next almost year. Now, just look a little bit farther. Look at the next story. Jesus and his family visit to Capernaum. Well, Capernaum is where Peter lived. And so that is getting closer to Peter's home territory. He probably did some fishing. Jesus probably stayed in his home when he was there. Drop on down to verse 31. Sorry, story 31 on page 36. Christ's first cleansing of the temple. Oh, where are they now? Where's the temple? That's in Jerusalem. How far away is it?
About 65 miles.
About 75 miles south. They are putting a lot of Fitbit steps in. They are getting a lot of mileage. And you begin to realize, there was some long distances here they're walking. The reason they are down in Jerusalem is for Passover. This is the first Passover of the Judean ministry. So they're back down there. And notice how this story ends. Again, verse 21, John 2. But the temple he had spoken of was his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he had said. Then they believed the scripture and the words that Jesus had spoken. So again, we have these 5 disciples watching Jesus cleanse the temple. We also have Nicodemus watching, and the next story is about Nicodemus. And we go on, turn the page, and you'll see other things that are going on in this beginning part of Jesus' Judean ministry. And when we come to story number 36. Here we have Christ's reasons for leaving Judea. And we have here the Pharisees heard in John chapter 4, the Pharisees heard that Jesus was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who was baptizing, but his disciples. When the Lord learned of this, he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. We have Jesus moving back and forth between the north and the south, but we have him primarily working in the south. And these 5 are in and out, back and forth with him, sometimes traveling with him, sometimes not. Sometimes we see them with him. Here they're with him in Samaria. Look at the next story, John chapter 4, and notice that this is the story of the woman at the well. And look how this one includes those first few disciples. Drop down to verse 31 on page 40, John chapter 4, verse 31. Meanwhile, his disciples urged him, Rabbi, eat something. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you know nothing about. Then his disciples said to each other, could someone have brought him food? My food, said Jesus, is to do the will of him who sent me. Drop on down to verse 39. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with him. He stayed 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. So here we have these first 5 traveling with Jesus, some watching him, and that goes on for a little over a year. And now we come to the next year where Jesus is beginning his Galilean ministry. And I hope I haven't lost you in this explanation, because now I want you to come back to Matthew and tap back to Mark. And look here where we're on page 44. When Jesus looks at Peter and Andrew and he says, come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. This is not the first time that they've talked. This is not the first time that Jesus has had interaction with them. If all we had were Matthew and Mark, we might think that. But John has told us quite a bit of the backstory. And we realize that Jesus has been engaged with them for about a year, a little over a year. And yet they've been coming and going, and they're now back at their regular work. And in their work, Jesus now comes to them with a new next step. And I want you to just let that sink in. After a year of hanging out with Jesus, kind of informally, Jesus is saying, okay, I've got a new next step for you. Now, just let this settle for a moment. And I want to ask you a question. We reviewed all of that Judean ministry and some of the stuff that went on there for a reason. And here's my question to you. During that year, from the time that Jesus and Peter first locked eyes, and Jesus looks at Peter and he says, you're Simon. I'm going to give you a nickname. I'm going to give you a nickname of Rocky. That's what Peter means, the rock. From that moment until this moment is over a year. And there was a bunch of stuff that happened in that year. Here's my question. What has happened in Peter's experience? Just reading those stories. What is Peter thinking about Jesus? What conclusions is he coming to? What has happened to Peter in the last year? Talk to me. Please, John.
Well, it seems that, even though he had a small fishing business, it was doing well. It was doing well. That Peter, James, John, Bartholomew, all those guys could take off whenever they wanted to. Don't follow Jesus, even though he was 75 miles south. Whenever he had done some of these things, they witnessed his miracles. They had heard his words. He spoke with authority and power, and nobody made them feel like he did.
Yeah, good point.
They built up a relationship with him.
And John, just a little side point to your comment that they were doing well. Now, this is not Peter's business. It is James and John's. But if you look in Mark's account, and it says, is it Mark's account that says the hired hands?
Yeah.
Why am I not seeing it? Oh, there it is. It's in verse 20 of Mark 1. Without delay, he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. That's a no-brainer. If you've got hired people, your business is doing better than if you have no hired people. If you're just eking it out all on your own, your business is not doing as well. But if you are able to hire people, your business is probably doing better. Yeah. Okay. I think first Gordon and then Ken.
When I think about this process that Peter and frankly the others went through, I see an analogy with what happens with a lot of folks today. They are drawn by the scriptures and preaching to the church. They get in the church, they spend a lot of time doing various things and growing. And often they don't really come close to Christ much Peter.
Yep.
And I see that here. Now we have other examples in the Bible, like the thief on the cross.
Yep.
No, he didn't go through that. But this was part of bringing them all to the point where God wants us to get to today.
Yep.
Willing to let us take time to do that.
Gordon, that is such an excellent point. I'm glad that you've put it so well, because that happens so often to so many of us that we step across the line of making a decision, but we're still pretty unsure of ourselves. We may be immature. There may be a lot that we don't get, and we're kind of back and forth and in and out, but we're at least moving in the right direction. Our face is in the right direction. Yeah. Thank you. Ken, you had a comment.
Well, first, to some words coming. And don't take this the wrong way, but because we hear about the thief on the cross so much, and what options did he have?
Yeah.
He had nothing to lose.
Yeah.
But back to the and I'm glad he made that decision. But back to, I looked at my old harmony, which is falling apart, and looked at what I'm trying to get today. The big catch of fish actually was the bonus I have in my own notes that allowed them financially to probably make the big move here.
Yes.
They caught more fish than they'd ever dreamed in one night.
Yep.
So financially they were taken care of. I think that's listen to people who are on the fence about the Lord and how much should they really do for the Lord each month or each week.
Yeah. Excellent point. Thank you, Ken. Anybody else? Let me just focus a moment longer on this last year. And what had Peter seen? What conclusions do you think he'd come to? What was going on for Peter before he hit this point? Please.
Something that strikes me on this is we just assume that he came to them and all of a sudden they were ready. We don't know if in that prior year they had tried to join him. He said, "You're not ready." We have the idea of what we know there's interaction there, but we don't have a clue.
Yeah.
Strikes me that a lot of us, we might say, "Oh, I'm ready to go do this. I'm going to be a big missionary," whatever. And there's a lot of people who just aren't ready.
Yeah. Wow.
It just struck me.
I had never thought of it from that perspective, that maybe Jesus was kind of holding them back and saying, you need a little bit more before, because when you come on the road with me full time, that's going to be a different gig. And I want you to settle into this a little more. Wow, I'd never thought about that. Thank you. Anybody else? What's been going on for Peter this last year? Please, Roy. Oh, and then we have
I'm going to talk about the fact talk about Peter and the fact that he denied Christ when he was going to be crucified. So we're talking about his maturity, but we're also talking about his personality.
Yeah.
Peter is a very outgoing person who is bombastic and impulsive. And I think all of this plays into how Peter was at the beginning and how long it took him to develop, even up to after Christ's death on the cross.
Yeah. Yes.
But then he was solid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Douglas?
Mother, just a second. There was a hand before yours, and then we'll come to you.
It seems like that Jesus was, with all these events and series, building up their belief.
Yes. Yes. Jesus is definitely building up their belief. Thank you. Mother, your comment.
Well, we talked about Peter having a successful business. And he was probably not looking for anything better. He was satisfied with his life. But then he gets to this point where he fishes all night and catches nothing.
Yeah.
And by his own admission, he's a failure at his job. And Jesus steps in at that point and shows Peter that, yes, you are a failure at what you've chosen to do, but I can control the fish and give you a catch. And I'm not even a fisherman, but I'm calling you to something better. Come follow me. And if I can cause you to have a big catch of fish, I'm going to cause greater things in your life. You're going to catch people for me.
Yeah.
And there's sort of a parallel there. Peter is catching fish that are alive and they become dead. And Jesus is calling him to catch men who are basically dead and make them alive in the knowledge of Jesus.
Nice. Very nice. Thank you, Mother. Okay, I can tell that we're just kind of one more comment, and then we're going to get into Luke's account because we've not read Luke's account yet. I think that was John's hand.
Yes, sir, it
Please.
is. I think Peter is having some quite ambivalent feelings. He hears the word of Jesus and thrills to his teaching and preaching. He sees the miracles and his heart is thrilled again. And then all of the officials reject Jesus, and he has doubts. Even his own synagogue tries to push him out of town and kill him. And here I am. I fished all night long. I haven't caught a thing. I'm a professional fisherman. I never come back empty-handed except today. And you're telling me to fish during the day? You're a carpenter. Why don't you go back and build a
Yeah. Great. Thank you, John. Okay, we are going to jump into the account from Luke, because Luke tells this story and adds some marvelous details that we really want to see. Let's look at Luke chapter 5. So turn the page back on page 43, where this story is told from Luke's perspective. One day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, with the people crowding around him and listening to the word of God, he saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that the nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' feet. Let me start again. Verse 8. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will catch men." So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him. Now, Luke tells this story. You can tell it's the same story, but wow, does he ever give us some new details. So let me just first ask you to notice, what are the details that we get in Luke's story that we did not get from Matthew and Mark? What does Luke give us here? John?
Well, I think it's just a big a miracle that Jesus kept the fish away from his nets all night long.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, Peter knows fishing. He knows what size nets to have. And even his nets wouldn't hold all the fish.
Yeah. Okay. Somebody else. What are the details that Luke gives us that we did not see earlier in Matthew and Mark? Please. Yes, Rod.
One of the things that strikes me is Jesus wants all of us to end up at the same place in a relationship with him, salvation and all that. But Jesus meets us all where we are. And Simon was a fisherman, so he met him with fishing.
Yep.
That led him.
Great comments. Nobody's answered my question yet, though. Please. What are the details in Luke that we do not see in Matthew and Mark? And you may or may not be addressing that, but please go ahead.
Well, Jesus is actually in the boat with him. Like, he gets into the boat to teach the people. So there, not only is Jesus in the boat with him when he says this, but there's also probably a crowd on the shore possibly watching all this happen.
Yeah.
We don't get
Yes.
the other
Good. So there's a detail we don't get in Matthew and Mark. Somebody else. Detail here that we don't get from Matthew and Mark.
Well, Simon did the old yabba. So, I didn't catch any fish all night, but because you say so. So there's the building of the belief. He did.
Yes. Thank you for noticing. And how does he address Jesus? Yeah. So we see two things here in this little comment that say, Peter has come to have some confidence in Jesus. He said, this makes no sense, but I've come to trust you enough that if you say it, I'll act on it. So excellent catch. Anything else? What else do you see here in Luke that gives us some details that we did not see from Matthew and Mark?
Well, I was just gonna add to what she's saying. Like, when I read that, I think Peter is exhausted from the night's work. He's probably exasperated at Jesus' request. And I think that he means to have a period where the comma is, Master fished all night and didn't get anything. But I picture Jesus giving him this look like, really? It's me you're talking to. So a little bit. Okay, because it's you, we'll do it. It's just kind of like this.
Yeah. I mean, it becomes very clear here. This is not their first rodeo together.
Right.
And that's what if you were just reading Luke, you say, well, wow, how is it they know each other here? Well, we know that from John. They've been hanging out together for over a year. I think, Abner, you had your hand up maybe, or yeah, please.
Doug, you've addressed the series The Chosen before, and that's the only time I've ever seen them add this facet to Jesus. He basically goes like this to John.
Yeah.
He says, then cast your nets, and as Jesus looks at him, he goes, all of a sudden the water calls up and the fish are in the net.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever.
It's a nice touch. It is a nice touch in that series. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, Ken, and then I think we have another comment in the back, please.
Well, what might have been even more remarkable, Peter, was the fact that they're fishing at night because the fish come in the shallow water at night. Their nets aren't long enough or broad enough to fish during the day because the fish migrate back to deeper water.
Right.
I'm sure that was on his mind too. Like, this is a true way. I would never caught anything out there.
Yeah.
Shot.
Yeah, excellent thought. Thank you. I think there was a hand in the back. I missed it.
It was me. So,
okay, please.
So I actually heard a sermon on this week, and I keep coming back to this, and I don't quite understand it. But so before Jesus taught from the streets. He was in the crowds. He was with the people. He touched people. At this point, why is it so significant that he pull away from the crowd and get in the? I understand that there's masses, yes, that are coming together, but why has Jesus pulled himself away from being in the thick of the crowd?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Tiffany, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Tiffany, that's such a great question. And I think that there's a fairly simple answer to do with logistics, and I'm not sure that Luke gives it. No, it doesn't. And I may be remembering wrong, but it seems like there is another one of the stories that's very much like this, and it's a logistical thing, just so that people can see and hear him better. Because if you've got a lot of people crowding around, and by by the way that lakes are constructed, lakes are always at the lowest spot, and the banks go up from there. And so if Jesus is going to be seen and heard, then getting out on the boat just a little ways is going to make it easier for people to see and hear him. I think it's logistics.
I think he also uses that with the disciples as that miracle with the fish as a way to reach the crowd as well.
Yeah.
Almost puts it on display for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Going on because they hadn't caught anything from the night before. So when he saw those boats down there, he went and hopped in and went, "This is what I'm about to do." He knew what was going on.
Right. Okay, let's dig into this story as Luke tells it, looking at a few more of the details. You brought up some wonderful points here. Let's look at a few more of the details as Luke tells the story. And I want to start again with where Tiffany actually took us, back to verse 1. One day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, which is another name for Sea of Galilee, with the people crowding around him and listening to the word of God. And just pause there for a second. Recognize how different this is from the Judean ministry. Jesus ended the Judean ministry on a fairly low note, with not a lot of success, with the religious leaders driving him out of town essentially. But Jesus had given the first opportunity to the religious leaders, to the educated, to the populated area. At this time, Capernaum likely is a town of about 1,500 people. It's not huge, but it is a key center of trade, and the cross routes, the trade routes went right through there, going south down into Egypt and north up into Syria and beyond. And it's a place where there's quite a bit of commerce and trade going on. So it's not a bad place to market your wares, but it's small, it's 1,500 people. By contrast, you have Jerusalem, where Jesus starts his ministry, which is the biggest city, it's the capital city. Estimates are somewhere between 40,000 and even up to 80,000 people. Small by today's standards, but much, much bigger than a place like Capernaum. And Jesus has started his ministry down in the city, in the capital city, and spent a year in the Judean area thereabouts. And that's where John the Baptist had been, roughly in that area, out about 20 miles in the desert from Jerusalem. But both Jesus and John had given an opportunity for the people in the south, where there's more population, more education, where the temple is, where the capital is. They'd given the first shot there for about a year without much response. Now Jesus moves north up into the sticks, up into the hillbilly country, and people are crowding around him. He is getting standing room only audiences. And just kind of get that feel too, that Peter has been watching this progress. And even though Peter's been in and out, back and forth, he has seen what's happened last year, and he watches here in his own home territory. He watches a different response to Jesus. And just get that flavor as Luke starts telling the story. He says, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God, as opposed to arguing with him, rejecting him, walking away, that sort of thing. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the net for a catch. Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come, which then incidentally is another little detail that Luke gives here that we did not see from Matthew and Mark, that even though it's implied in Matthew and Mark that this is a two-family operation, here it says it clearly. So you have James and John who are brothers, and you have Simon and Peter who are brothers. I mean, Simon and Andrew who are brothers, and the four of them have formed a partnership. And so we've got this two-family small business. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. Now, again, I think that while The Chosen does not necessarily get the sequencing of this correct, and there are some things with The Chosen that just don't quite fit together, and that is they don't get the sequencing. They show this as if this was the first time that Jesus had met Peter. That's all right. But what they do get really well here is the artistic portrayal of the absolute thrill and excitement of this huge catch. And if you've not watched The Chosen, you might want to watch. This is in episode 2, I think, where they just show these four guys and Zebedee, the dad, just absolutely ecstatic. And I want you to just stop and think for a second. The way that The Chosen pictures it is that they have really been coming up empty-handed for quite some time, and they're desperate. And in their desperation, they really need a big catch. Now, we've postulated that it could have been the opposite, that they've had enough success that they've been able to come and go, and it could be either way. We don't have enough evidence to say. But at any rate, at the very least, they'd had a tiring failure of a night. They've been up all night, they haven't caught anything, and their excitement is just bursting. I want you to just stay in that moment stay in that feeling for a moment. Think about times when things have not been going well, and all of a sudden, on a dime, things just turn, and you have gone from failure to success. You've gone from what looks like calamity to now a solution. And think about the emotions of relief and joy, and the sense of, wow, everything is going to be okay. Think about the emotions of that moment and just live into that. That's where Peter's at emotionally. Now watch what happens next in that emotion. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." Now, in a moment, I'm going to ask a question, and I would like to invite those of you who have not spoken up yet to address this question, because sometimes there are people who have really good thoughts, and you're just not quite as quick on the draw as the others, and so you let other people speak for you. So let me invite people who have not spoken up yet to respond to this. But here's my question. Why, in this moment of thrilling excitement and joy, would Peter say, "Go away from me, Jesus, I'm sinful"? I mean, that on one hand, that seems like a really odd response to this whole thing. Why would that be Peter's response? Go away from me, Jesus, I'm sinful. When the moment is one of thrill and excitement about something really good that's just happened, why would Peter say, "Go away from me, I'm sinful"? Let me hear from some of you, and let me hear from some who have not spoken up. Clear in the back, we've got a hand.
I wonder if this isn't a conversion moment in his heart,
Ah,
where you suddenly feel how you're not equal to the Jesus that you knew before, and now you recognize.
wow. Wow. Maurice, that's powerful. Is this a conversion moment? He's been hanging out with Jesus for a long time. And it's like, wow, he gets it. And there is something that is just really shifting inside of Peter at this moment. Thank you, Maurice. Somebody else, somebody who hasn't spoken up. What in the world is Peter doing here by saying at this moment, go away from me, Jesus, I'm sinful? Please.
I think he was so overwhelmed with this miraculous, over the edge, beyond generous, beyond powerful, beyond decadent, and just, he probably was just so overwhelmed by the intensity and the magnitude of what a huge thing that Jesus had just done, that he did not feel worthy of such opulence, such extravagance.
Wow.
And
wow.
such generosity and love and care, because he would think he would do that for a really good person. It made him feel, bad about everything that he's ever done, and of such incredible, over the edge generosity.
Wow. Could I paraphrase? Tell me if I'm doing justice to your comment. At this moment, Peter realizes this is not about the fish, it's about Jesus. And he could dance in joy about the fish, but that's not the biggest part of the story. At that moment, Peter realizes the biggest part of the story is Jesus.
He just got a glimmer of the magnitude of how awesome God is.
Yeah.
And
wow.
he felt his unworthiness.
Yeah, wow, thank you. I got a comment here texted to me. Peter caught a glimpse of God. Up to now, he'd seen the human side, but now he sees God. Wow, that's powerful. Somebody else, please.
I've kind of been thinking about how this call is different, and I think it plays in here. Before, when Peter was getting to know Jesus, Peter was choosing Jesus. Like, he was like, oh, hey, I'm going to follow you. And he maybe mentally assented to the fact that he's the Messiah, because, John says, look, and then Andrew comes along and goes, okay, I think we found the Messiah. So he's mentally assented to this. He's seeing some things, but here this is Jesus, the Son of God, choosing him.
Wow. I don't know why my mind went to such a mundane experience, but if any of you ever experienced this in grade school, when they chose up teams to play kickball or dodgeball or something, and you were the last person to get chosen, and instead of getting chosen, each captain would say, you take him, no, you take him. And that, I lived through that many times as a kid, because I was the scrawny little runt in the class, and to be chosen by somebody that you now recognize as God. Wow. Okay, a couple more comments. Marge.
It gives me courage to know that God will speak to me with my needs, how I need to be brought to him in a special way. I'm not a fisherman, but I have a lot of things in my life that he has spoken to me through to help me to trust him and to fall at his knees.
Yeah.
I am so grateful for this story, because it says to me, he'll speak to me when I need it.
Wow. Thank you. We are so close to out of time that I'm going to take any hands that were already up, but not any new hands. Were there any hands that I missed?
Ruth.
Please, Ruth.
I think it's significant that God knows our hearts so well and where we are at a particular moment, so that when he issues his call to us, it could be when we're at our darkest, our lowest point.
Yeah.
Like when Peter, after the night of not catching anything, Jesus did not call him at that time.
Yeah.
He waited until after the miracle, after success. And perhaps at that time, if it had been some of us, we would have been less likely to respond to the call.
Yeah.
Our success, we don't need Jesus, but yet he knows us well.
Oh, Ruth.
At whatever point that we will respond.
Yes. Wow. I had never thought about that either, that some people Jesus calls in success because that's the best time to reach him. And some people he calls in their absolute failure because that's the best time. Wow, that's beautiful. Okay, folks, I got to wrap it up. we're almost done here. But let's finish reading this account from Luke, and then I'm going to ask you one last question. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid." I wish we had time to pause on that. Don't be afraid. From now on, you will catch men. So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him. Now they're going to make Capernaum their headquarters, and they're going to come back. But from this day on until the cross, Peter's on the road full time with Jesus. He has taken a next step in his following of Jesus. And we've only explored that for about the last half hour or so. But I'm going to ask you to jump. What do you see about this next step that might have anything to do with the next step that God is asking you to do? God may not be asking you to take this step that he asked Peter to take, but he is asking you to take some step. What do you see from this story that might give you some idea of a next step that God is asking for you? Anybody? Please. I think I saw a hand and then John's. Was there a hand that was just a couple rows back? Maybe I saw somebody just swatting a fly. Okay, let's go to you, John.
Matthew 9, verse 9. As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax office.
Mm-hmm.
He said to him, "Follow me." So he arose and followed him. He left the money on the table.
Yeah.
All of Jesus' disciples left the fish, their money, on the table.
Okay.
They were caught, not like the fish in a net, struggling to get away. They were caught by their faith and their love with their Creator, and they didn't want to get away.
Thank you.
They wanted what he wanted them to do.
Thank you. Gordon.
Just thinking about this follow me thing.
Mm-hmm.
When Jesus was here, he asked these men in particular to follow him physically.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there was a large spiritual content to that. Today, he asks us to follow him too.
Yeah.
In various ways that we might live for him, but it's a very spiritual thing.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, the physical and the spiritual are blended, but sometimes they have a little bit different logistics to them. Is there anybody else? We need to wrap up, but I want to catch any of that. Last comment here, please.
I was just going to say that what struck me most is that now they have a completely different occupation.
Yeah.
I don't know how that relates metaphorically, but
yeah.
I think there's a spiritual lesson there somewhere.
Yeah, there is. Well, I'm sorry that we ran it so close to the end because I want us to think about this, and we've only had a moment to do it. But could I challenge you to say, is there something in this wholehearted response that says, Jesus, this is more about you than anything else. And yes, I am willing to take whatever next step you ask of me. That's this moment. Now, Peter's going to flip-flop around a bit. But in this moment, his heart is so wide open to Jesus that he says, whatever you say, Jesus, that's exactly what I'm going to be and do. I will take the next step. And I see that as an application to me, because I know that so often I'm guarded and hedging and cautious and saying, well, I don't know, maybe. And Jesus is asking for me to open my heart wide to him in the way that Peter was here. And of course, what Peter sees is that this is not about the fish. That's great, but this is really about Jesus. And he responded beautifully to Jesus in a way that I admire and that I want to respond to Jesus too. Ken?
Thank you. First steps. They are very hard for us sometimes. I'll tell you what's gratifying to me is when someone comes through that door for the first time, they're very hesitant, they don't know anybody, it's human nature. And something said to Mark said, or I said, they stay for the hour. And they come to you as the next step and they said, who's that guy?
Amen.
We taught this Southern. They had that same book. They didn't teach it that way when I was there. It's that first step of coming in. It's just amazing what I've seen happen in this class. And the first steps sometimes are the best steps of your life. They really are. For those who aren't on our email list that are new here today, take the first step. Come up to me just a moment. Let's get you on the email list. Let's get your name and address so who you are or who you are. And let's appreciate all your comments. Class today. And Doug, thank you again. Doug writes our lessons each week for those who are. And really appreciate you hanging in there with me. I know it's sometimes big surprises for you from day to day, so we can wait sometimes. But Doug's always there for me. And Abner is always here. Alan is doing something that Alan said none of you know about to help people hear about the gospel. I see it every day coming down the road. He's got a billboard coming down Appleton Pike, clear gospel. It's Alan. He's taking care of that. A lot of things going on that nobody even knows happening. How many people on your YouTube thing are going to see this? Or 35,000?
59,000 plus.
About how many people are actually seeing the lessons?
Every week it's several hundred.
Yeah, we don't know who these people are. It's amazing what people are doing behind the scenes. It's on a, what is it? What's the primary source of this?
The channel is Tier 1 Citizen, and you go to the playlists, and it's Bible Study, the Life of Christ. And we're on, this is lesson 19, right, Doug?
Yeah, but it's not, that's not, it's about weapons and ammunition and all that kind of stuff.
The reason I chose that venue is there are so many more people there that every time that I release these videos, 59,000 plus people get an alert on their phone. And the people that comment on my firearms videos comment on these videos. They're watching. We're reaching people.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I tell you, I really appreciate everyone. Marge, we have our prayers.
God, it is overwhelming how personal you make. You're seeking us and then bringing us to a confession and just putting ourselves right there at your feet. And it doesn't just happen once, because we know in Peter's life, it happened more than once. So therefore, we know how patient you are with us. Thank you so much. And thank you for each person here. And we just thank you for the blessing that you have brought to us through Doug. Thank you, Lord. In thy name, amen.
Thanks again. Come on up. I'll get over your email list and we'll get you to the line.